Hello. Welcome to the Soul Elevation podcast, guiding your ascension to new heights. I'm your host, Kara Goodwin, and I'm really excited to be here today to talk about ascension. And something that's been on my mind lately is the difficulty, how difficult we make it, and how important it might or might not be to know what's happening behind the scenes. So it's really interesting because things can get really complicated when you start engaging with spiritual work because there are the mystery schools, there's the Kabbalah, there's Asian traditions with the Tao and the I Ching, and we've got, in modern times, we have gene keys and we have human design and we have healing modalities and all of these, light language, and more people are adding their own understandings, their own modalities into the mix. And so we have this like smorgasbord of ways to advance our soul, to advance ourselves along the spiritual path of ascension. And there are so many different ways. If you think of spiritual growth or ascension as being a prism, and their light comes into this prism and it separates the light into all these different colors. And we can think of those colors as different ways to look at ascension. So, in my own personal evolution, my own personal journey, I have explored the ray of yoga and the ray of meditation and the ray of Reiki and the ray of sacred geometry and on, where I've explored these different aspects of spiritual awakening. And I just got back from the Sedona Ascension retreat. Well, I say I just got back. It's been a week now, but it still feels like I'm landing back in after being at the Sedona Ascension retreat. And there were such incredible speakers, and they all have their gifts, their focus, what they have dedicated their lives and their spiritual exploration to going, to focusing on and using for their own growth. So there may be things like ancient Egypt, and there are lots of different ways to explore the teachings of ancient Egypt in terms of mystery school teachings related to ascension. So you can use the hieroglyphs. And what are the hieroglyphs telling us? And there were presentations about the hieroglyphs and that they were showing the ability to move between dimensions, to ascend to higher realms, to come back to the physical realm, that were substances, there were pictorial representations of substances, of alchemy, and all of these things are like laid out in the hieroglyphs. And then there are the structures of the pyramids themselves, not only in Egypt, but in other places, in the Mayan cultures, in, Romania, in lots of different places around the world. They have pyramids that have the same dimensions. And so what is the math telling us? In terms of like the base and that, or the ratio to the height or half of the height. Sorry, the base, yeah, the base, the horizontal, like how wide at the bottom versus how tall it is, or what the triangle, like the measurements of the triangle of the pyramid. And what that might have to do with multidimensionality. And when you look at the pyramids, not just one pyramid, but all of the pyramids, and you look at all of their ratios because they have different ratios, that tells us something. So there's like this mathematical component, this mathematical encodement that other people are focused on. And that even relates to like the musical scales. And it gets really amazing. I mean, my mind was like blown with some of the things that people are discovering. And there's also this complexity to it. I also was a guest on somebody's podcast last week, and this was a Taoist priest. And this guy has been deep in Taoism for like 35 years or something like that. And he just had all of this knowledge and it related to like the Dantians, which is a new, I'm not that familiar with with Taoism, with a lot of the Eastern, Far Eastern teachings, spiritual teachings, or martial arts, or all of those. Like that's still something I haven't really explored. So the way that the words that he was using and the way that he was describing spiritual evolution, it was all new to me, and it got complicated from my perspective because I don't have a lot of exposure to what he was talking about. Pardon me for just a second. I just want to check. Yes. Okay, good. I want to check my setting there. Um, and so, anyway, I could go on and on and on about all the ways that we can explore the mystery of life and all of the different avenues that we have to reveal the mystery, to reveal more than just the surface of what's happening. But it also makes it really complicated, and it can make it very mental, where we're trying to figure things out. I've done deep dives into sacred geometry. You can see sacred geometry behind me, which I find fascinating. It's so fascinating, and it is very expansive. Um, and it can get complicated. I mean, if you look at the design behind me, that's not even like really that complicated, but it is also. There's a lot to it. There's a lot held within the geometry behind me that can be broken down, and we can look at from terms of angles, ratios, shapes, and all of that is communicating information to us, and it's energy, right? So, but the other aspect of ascension is that it can be simple. I mean, it's not easy. Of course, it's not easy. We can see that because most people are not ascending. Even ones who are very interested in spiritual concepts and philosophies, it takes a while to master this stuff. But you also want to consider that there are people who don't even realize that they're on a spiritual path, who are living from their hearts and making the best choices for themselves. They're caring about the people who are around them. They're enjoying life. They're taking time to not get caught up in the mix, but they may not be attracted to the concept of ascension, or it may be something that's completely hidden from them that they have no exposure to it. So they don't even know it's a thing. And yet they are advancing along their path because of the way that they're choosing to live in harmony with their highest good, just innately. Or they may be living in harmony with nature that is aligning their energy fields in a very supportive and nurturing way that is carrying them along in a spiritually evolving way, but they're not even being intentional about it. So things to do with mathematical codes, things to do with astrology, things to do with healing modalities and energy, vibration, frequency, the psilocybin activations, all of those things could be completely hidden from them. And yet they're rapidly progressing because they're living in that alignment. So it's like so many things in this reality. It's such a balance, isn't it? It's like there's so many levels and layers. It's not ever just one thing. It's not like when you go to college or when you're in school and it's like the person with the most understanding, the most intellectual understanding of the mechanics of ascension are the ones who are going to get there. You know, it's not like that. It's like we actually don't need it's beyond the intellect. It's beyond the mind, and we can get caught up in the lure of understanding things with our mind, especially if we have cherished the left hemisphere of the brain, which is my case. I was always like a devoted student. I prized my intellect. And so, and I'm very, very interested in the mechanics of ascension. It's very alluring for me. I like to understand it. I like to understand how it's working, and if there is, some something for me to understand to take into my practice so that I can have more of my higher self embodied in my expression and to express myself with more divinity and let that divinity radiate out through me. So if somebody has tips or they've uncovered, they've decoded something and I want to understand it, then I like to dive in. So I definitely use my intellect, and I'm definitely drawn to understanding, unpacking the ascension experience. But it's also just important for us to step back and be like, that's all well and good, and it is fascinating and it's interesting. And it really, we don't have to know the mechanics. I feel like I heard somebody recently who was talking about this, and maybe they were relating it to like a car. Was that Michael Massey? I can't remember now who it was. But this wasn't my idea, and I can't remember if it's the right analogy, but this analogy will work. Um, like if you're gonna drive a car, you can just get in, turn the car on, use the gas pedal, the brake pedal, and the steering wheel and get and use your car, and you can have it take you somewhere. Or you can do those things, but also understand internal combustion and how the motor works, and how the gas fuels the car and the pistons and the alternator and the brakes. And you could know the car inside out and how it functions in order to work properly. But you don't need all that information to use your car. And it's the same thing. We have this human technology, this human body technology. We have the consciousness within this body that is all working together to help us to move through life and to move through our spiritual journey, to help us to continue to evolve spiritually. And the mechanics of ascension are available to us if that's interesting to us, if that's helpful for us on our journey, if that's kind of the way that we're inclined. But if we're just living from our heart and we're intending that we put forward that we're aligned with the highest good for everybody, and we just want to be the best version that we can be in this life that we have, the experience, the opportunity that we have in this life, and it stops at that, that's equal. It's equal to knowing the mechanics and understanding things at the intellectual level. And in fact, it may even be less distracting because, I'm sure that you see examples in your own experience of people who maybe understand spiritual concepts, but they're not really embodying them. And worse, you see a lot of cult leaders who understand very well the mechanics of spiritual evolution, and they're using that to manipulate people. That is, unfortunately, there are some very masterful narcissists who take take spiritual truth and twist it just enough to use it for their advantage. And they end up taking advantage of people. And so just because you really understand the ins and outs of complicated spiritual philosophy, mechanics, however you want to think of it, principles, doesn't that by its own virtue does not mean that somebody is actually really ascending. So is ascension complicated or is it simple? I know it's not easy, but it can be both. It can be complicated and it can be easy. Oh, sorry, it can be simple. Simple and easy are different, but it can be simple. So I hope that makes sense. And, you can see my book behind me, Your Authentic Awakening. If you are interested in developing your spiritual journey, developing along your spiritual journey, this book might be just what you need. You can get your copy. If you're in the US, you can get a signed copy with free shipping at karagoodwin.com/book. It will be available everywhere. You can pre-order it now on Amazon and Barnes & Noble globally. So you can go ahead and order that, but it might I go into some of this too in the book, particularly that last part about people who manipulate using spiritual truths, which is a very interesting and vulnerable chapter. So anyway, I'm wishing you many, many blessings on your journey. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.